Right, UFC 303. Yes, of course, I prefer it to be Conor McGregor against Chandler. You lot might prefer to see this fight, but I hate seeing fights I've already seen. But, anyways, Ricky Simón versus Vinicius Oliveira. Hard. I'm going to go with Ricky Simón, and I'll tell you why. And I'm going to go with a decision. No, you know what? I'm going to go with a submission. No, you know what? I'm going to go with a decision. And the reason I'm not going submission is I think Ricky Simón is going to be too scared to like forcefully get the submission, because you play a dangerous game with this guy. If this guy keeps it on the feet, he will beat Ricky Simón. Look at the last fight of Mario Batista. He did not know what to do, Ricky Simón. When he couldn't get the takedowns working, his striking isn't all that special. Jiří landed that overhand right on Jack Shaw and put him down and got the arm triangle. But apart from that, he doesn't have that many technical bits about his striking. Like when we saw him come up against a more technical boxer in Song Yadong, he was shooting for the legs, getting sprawled and hooked to the body constantly on the back foot. Vinicius Oliveira, when he is in his stride, his hands will come down. You won't be able to see where the punches are coming because they're not as telegraphed. And he'll start kicking you in the leg and he'll start jabbing you in your face. And then that's when the heavy hands start like happening. And this guy is big as well. So I am going to go with a Simón decision, but there is a chance of submission because when Vinicius Oliveira gets taken down, instead of trying to like get up by just backing his back into the cage and building his way up, he will usually turn to go onto all fours. And no, don't take that out of context. And build his way back up to the feet by doing that. And if you come up against a guy like Ricky Simón, who has got good jiu-jitsu, who had Merab Dvalishvili gasping for air, you've got a good chance of getting submitted because he turns, he goes onto all fours, gives away his back, and he did it multiple times against Bernard Soppage. And if you actually go back and look at that fight, it was very competitive. Earlier on, competitive. But as the rounds go further and further, starting to gas and gets put on the back foot. If Ricky Simón cannot get the takedown in this fight, Oliveira will win by KO. I do not see Oliveira winning a decision. I see the only way of this guy winning is by KO. Unless somehow we see a draw and he 10-8s him, and then Ricky Simón goes out there and pretty much just hugs him on the ground. But I think there is a chance of submission, but I think Ricky Simón will want to go out there. He won't want to force anything. He'll just want to get that win under his belt because 2 losses in a row now, it don't look good. But this Vinicius Oliveira guy is very good. I just don't think he throws enough knees. And you might be like, but he got a flying knee. Yeah. But he wasn't throwing knees throughout the fight. But if he does that, it will work. Because I saw Mario Batista do it a few times to counter the takedown. But I doubt he'll do it. But I think Ricky Simón should do it by decision. Right, it does look a bit weird to see a guy like this just out of nowhere come out. I know he's been on the road to the UFC. Be a minus 400 heavy favourite, but he deserves it. And I'm going with him to win. And I think he's going to submit him. This guy is the definition of just domination. When he gets you down to the ground, and he can do it in all sorts of ways. He can single leg you, he can pull you down pretty much by just taking your back. And the jiu-jitsu on this guy as well matches the grappling. And Carlos Hernandez, he struggled against a guy who was a bit bigger than him in Alan Nascimento, who, to be fair, he landed a good front kick, backed him up against the cage, and then was able to shoot on the legs. And as soon as he shoots on him, transition to the back. And I believe Carlos Hernandez will struggle against a guy like Ray Tsuruya, because if you actually look at the fight with Tsuruya, not good, like getting KO'd by a guy like that. I know Tsuruya is good, but he's not really known for getting finishes by knockout. And I know the Alex Perez KO, that was controversial in terms of if you want to say it was a good KO. Not a controversial finish, it was a leg buckle and his leg gave out. But Ray Tsuruya, he dominates people with the grappling. It's none of this hugging on the ground. He is looking for a submission. He's being active on the ground. I wouldn't be surprised if he KO'd him with like punches on the ground, but I think he's going to go out there round 1 submission for me. I just think levels above this guy. This guy can go far. Like, imagine a fight with him and Tsuruya in the future. That's if he can go far. He's young as well, and I believe this guy definitely could be ranked in the future. The way he fights already. I know it's not against the best fighters, but when you look at a fighter and they fight in a certain way, you can kind of get signs. You know sometimes by looking at a guy whether they've got the abilities to make a rank, like get into the rankings. And I think he actually will. Because I don't really believe his takedown defense is that great. Like Daniel Perez got him down about 5 times. Dennis Bonder only got him down about 2 times. But he is quite easy to take down. And when you come up against a grappling specialist like this guy, not going to end up well for him. So striking wise, that's the only thing I'm a bit suspect on, because this guy's striking, it doesn't look it at all. It really don't. It looks very average. He's always shooting for the legs. And I believe Carlos Hernandez, the only way he can win for me is a decision. Ray Tsuruya could win a decision, but I think it's more likely it's going to submit or KO this guy. Right, Andrei Arlovski versus Martin Buday. Andrei Arlovski, he, again, is a pensioner in about 10 years. I'm not picking the pensioner to beat a guy who's not young, but I think has got the technical ability to beat him now. Like, he made it competitive with Waldo Cortez Acosta. You could argue he won that fight. But in my opinion, Waldo Cortez Acosta's boxing on the feet is not that great. Just look at his boxing record. I know it's MMA, but still, this guy is very overrated. Not overrated, probably overhated. Very boring and not that great. Andrei Arlovski is just past his prime. And Martin Buday, for me, there is a chance of a KO just because if this guy gets knocked out by air, if a heavyweight taps him on the chin, is he going to go down? Questionable. But no, I'm going to go over decision. I think this guy, I believe he trains with Tom Aspinall. He's brought him in his camp a few times and he clinches a lot. I've said it before. He fights a bit like Fury, dirty boxing, clinching. And if he can do that against a guy like Arlovski, I believe he will make him gas out. So, again, for Arlovski, he could win by a decision, but I just think because of his age, his cardio's not going to keep up with him. So the only way for Arlovski to win in reality probably is by KO. But I don't see that KO happening, honestly. Whereas Martin Buday, I think it's more likely for him to get a KO because, one, he's younger. Yeah, he doesn't have that much power, but he can overwhelm him with the volume. And because of the age, how taxing on the body with a bunch of punches and the damage he's probably taken in the last 5 fights. He kind of went on that win streak for a short time, but that was in the past. Then Martin Buday did not look good against Gaziev. He just pretty much marched him down and bullied him. But that's Gaziev, a guy who shouldn't have had that fight against Rosenstrike that early, but he was all right. And we knew that his boxing was all right. And we know that this guy here, Buday, he's had a bit of a controversial decision against, what was his name? Lucas Brzeski. He probably should have lost that fight. He got leg kicked a lot, but just somehow got the way of the judges. And I think this fight here, he could even mix in a takedown, but I don't think he'll want to do that until about round 3. So I think for me, he's going to win by a decision. Oh my God. This matchup here is the definition of bullying. And that's what will happen in the fight. I can guarantee you do not put anything on this fight. Because look at that favourite. That's, again, one of the biggest favourites we've had in the UFC in a long time. Like, that's Bo Nickel levels when he fights against some can. So, obviously, I'm going to go with Payton Talbott. Only 2% going with Yanis Ghemmouri. But that's not why I'm picking him. I'm picking him to do it by KO. And I think he can do it in the first round. One thing about, what's his name? Yanis Ghemmouri. He fought against William Gomez. Call it a nut shot. Call it not one. It was controversial. This guy is going to get beaten up bad because Payton Talbott, I don't compare him to O'Malley. Yeah, he's got kind of that edgy personality and he walks you down, but he doesn't throw the spinning wheel kicks. He hasn't got the footwork like him. He's more of a guy who walks you down. He's not really loose on the feet, but he is just the guy who just cracks you on the chin and it makes fighters crumble. Like Cameron Saman is a very hard guy to finish, and he literally was able to prevent the takedown by landing that knee, which sounded like it broke his jaw. I don't know if we've got an update on that, but that did severe damage. The only questionable fight for me was the Nick Aguirre, which he did win by submission, but if you go back and watch that fight, he actually got held down quite a lot earlier on in the fight, and then after a while of Nick Aguirre probably being tired, Talbott's able to read the takedown and then defend against it and then get into mount. Yanis Ghemmouri, he can do jiu-jitsu, but again, he looks quite light. He had to fight at featherweight, and he is a bantamweight naturally. But I think Talbott's going to be bigger than him, stronger than him. Like, did you see the way he just manhandled Cameron Saman when he went for that kick? Pretty much just pushed his leg, threw him into the cage. Yanis Ghemmouri's not going to be able to go out there and just clinch and do what he tried to do against William Gomez. It didn't work, and it won't work against this guy either. Because if you fight in that type of range, you will get caught with the uppercut, because Talbott's got like a very good rear uppercut, and I'm expecting him. He might not get the KO first round. It might be the second round. But he is going to get knocked out, because this guy, Yanis Ghemmouri, he tries to stay out of range with the kicking, and if you have a guy who's just constantly pressuring you and putting you on the back foot, there isn't going to be room to throw the leg kicks. And if you continue to ignore that and throw it, even though this guy was not giving you any space to throw, you're going to get countered. And as that leg's up in the air, he's pretty much going to get rocked and put out. And that's what I think is going to happen. But for Yanis Ghemmouri, the only way he can win is a submission, or if he somehow puts on a Anderson Silva masterclass and pretty much kicks him in the body and just keeps circling out and leg kicking him, and Talbott keeps missing, which won't happen. So for me, it's going to end horribly for Ghemmouri. Sorry. Charles Jourdain versus Gene Silva. I'm going with Gene Silva to win by KO. And I think this one is going to be in round 3. One thing I've noticed about Silva is he doesn't rush things, but he has stupid power. But Charles Jourdain has a good chin. But one thing that Jourdain can do is throw with too much volume at times. And when he comes up against a volume striker who can outwork him like Nathaniel Wood, he'll throw less, but he can get into very grueling type of fights. So the way for me, if Jourdain's going to win the fight, he isn't going to knock him out. He's going to win either a decision or he was going to get the submission. Because one thing I noticed, even though Gene Silva, he got straight back up after he got taken down by Weston Wilson, who to me is just rubbish. I'm just going to say it straight up. One thing about him is he got him down and he was able to get a bit of control before bouncing back up. Charles Jourdain's got this very sneaky guillotine where if he takes you down and you try and rush to get back up to your feet, he'll jump onto that neck and jump onto that guillotine. So that's the only thing I fear. But if it stays on the feet, I just think, even though you might say Charles Jourdain does a few more technical things, like he's probably got better leg kicks than him, boxing, purely just punching, which Gene Silva's going to be in range for, he hits harder than Jourdain, and I believe like the placement of his punches are just better, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Like Jourdain's good, but sometimes he can capitalize off mistakes, like Ricardo Ramos being stupid and shooting him for a takedown, like when he didn't need to do that, when he could have just carried on the feet and instead bottles the fight. So I think it will be a scrappy type of fight. Fight of the night potential, maybe. But I think Silva in round 3, I know he gets a lot of round 1 finishes, but the way he fights, if he was more aggressive and reckless and just hunting finishes, I'd be like, his cardio might drop and he'll lose. But I think because he don't rush things and he picks the right shots at the right moments with that right cross, I think he's going to slowly tire this guy out and then look for the finish in round 3. Right, I had to have more of a look on this one. Cub Swanson versus Andrei Fili. They're both actually quite old, but I am leaning into the favour of Andrei Fili, and I think he can win it by a decision. Cub Swanson's last fight, robbery. The guy on the mic even admitted he shouldn't have won that fight. And when you admit you don't win the fight, yeah, you might look back and think, oh, you did, but watching that fight, the first 2 rounds he was down. I don't get how he was given that fight, but anyways, the way he fights, kind of hands down, crisp boxing in the pocket. The only thing he'll struggle with is when the opponent starts to throw kicks and then pushes him out of boxing range. That's why I think it's a good matchup for him, because Andrei Fili don't really throw too many kicks. As a boxer, he'll want to stay in the pocket. And for me, this fight here has got fight of the night potential written all over it. But the reason I'm going with Fili, yes, I know he got knocked out cold, like brutally out cold by Dan Ige, but Cub Swanson don't hit people like Dan Ige. And he is old now, like he ain't the same type of Cub Swanson. He's slower now. He's got the ability to be put on the back foot at times. Even though he'll try and circle out and get back into range, he will take a lot of damage. Like looking at his face in the last fight, he takes a lot of visual damage with cuts, whereas Fili will take a lot of brain injuries by getting dropped in fights. Like Cub Swanson, I can't think of a time, apart from probably one, when he's been like knocked out cold from boxing. or TKO'd from boxing. They're not. They're usually by kicks. And I don't think Andrei Fili's going to do that. That's why I think the fight's got a decision written all over it. Although a KO is likely, but I don't think it will happen. So if I was going to pick something for the fight, I would do over 1.5 rounds. Because I think Swanson, even though he's old, he can stay in the fight. Like, if he mixes up the grappling, he could win a decision. Like, in the third round, if he comes out there, like, he's got a good judo throw in him. He struggled to get it in his last fight, but if he can get that to work and get down to the ground, that fight becomes even more favourable. But I think with the crowd there cheering him on, it'll be a fight where they're like brawling, that type of fight. But I do think Andrei Fili by decision. Right, hear me out. If this fight here was a 5-round fight, I would say it'd be more likely for Marc-Andre Barriault because he has very good cardio, but what he does lack is actual skill. Like, Jiří can march you down. It's easy to beat a guy who was gassing out. Like, Joe Pyfer had a good start to the last fight, but just started gassing out. And he was so overrated going into that. I don't think he's a fraud, but he was overhyped going into that fight. And we can all be reactionary. Right, back to what I was saying. Joe Pyfer, he was overrated, but his boxing is good. And I expect him to knock out Marc-Andre Barriault because although he's very tough, like, he's in your face. So, like, Chris Curtis has power. He could not finish this guy. Like, he's come against powerful people. Marquez outworked him, but he gets hit a lot in the first round, which is why I'm going with Joe Pyfer to win by KO in the first round, because I think even if he doesn't get the KO in the first round, in the second round, that's not when he starts the gas. It's like when you get into round 3, 4, and 5. And it's only a 3-rounder, which is why I think it's even better for him. And he can also mix in takedowns, but I think it would be hard to, like, bully this guy on the ground. I don't think it's that type of fight. Like, don't forget, this guy got starched by Chidi Njokwani. And look at Chidi Njokwani now. He looks scared to even strike with people, probably because of all the damage he was taken. But I do think Joe Pyfer's going to come back with a highlight reel KO and put Marc-Andre Barriault out. I don't think this is a fight where he can abuse the cardio. That only works in a 5-round fight. So for me, Pyfer, and he can also mix in the grappling and the clinch as well. Like, are people forgetting that he threw down Abdul Razak Al Hassan and was able to get the submission? But I don't think he'll do that. I think he wants that knockout, and he'll be very aggressive going into this fight. Right, Ian Garry versus Michael Page. I get it. Ian Garry, to me, looks like a very unlikable person. Not just because of that, like, what he did with his girlfriend. Like, I don't really care about that type of stuff. But his arrogance, the Conor McGregor wannabe, he just makes it hard for himself. And I feel like it's a gimmick that he enjoys, people hating him. And he always performs. And I'm not going to just be like, just because Michael Page styled on Kevin Holland, who in my opinion is a bottle job who just cares about money. He doesn't fight like how he should. And his IQ is very questionable. Whereas Ian Garry's IQ is very good with fighting. Like with boxing, for example. So I'm going to go with Ian Garry, decision. I cannot see Michael Venom Page knocking him out. Venom Page was getting these KOs over bums. He didn't do it to Kevin Holland. Jiří rocked Kevin Holland and taunts him a bit. So again, Michael Venom Page in this fight, do you think he's going to be hunting for that knockout? No. I think he's going to try and look to style onto him, like doing that side, side-on style, looking to jab against him. I think this is a fight with a split decision over it, but I think Ian Garry should have won, but they'll make it a split decision. If you get what I mean, like the judging is so inconsistent, but Ian Garry, his last performance against, what was it, not Neil Magny, I keep getting him confused with Jeff Neal. With Jeff Neal, it did not look convincing, but he did win on the back foot. And to be fair, this fight could end up being a very boring fight because, you know, when you put two counteracting styles with each other, like people who want to counter, they can both stay on the outside and no one wants to commit forward. So it's a bunch of leg kicks and a few fakes and feints and no one's actually punching each other. That's the type of fight I can see happening here, where they respect each other too much. But I think Ian Garry, for me, once he can get his combinations working, he can become more aggressive. I think the reason he didn't really want to do that with Jeff Neal is because he has a serious threat of power. Like, look what he did to Vicente Luque. Michael Venom Page cracked, I believe his name was Cyborg, in Bellator's skull. But he didn't do that with boxing. Whereas Jeff Neal did, so he had to be very scared. Like, Ian Garry's not worried about all these flying knees and all of that type of stuff, even though Marco Venom Page is very unpredictable with what he does. And I do want him to win, but in my opinion, I can just see Ian Garry going out there, leg kicking him, and just being boring and just pretty much fighting on the back foot again and just doing things to win the fight. Like, he doesn't take any risk. He doesn't look for the knockout. I don't expect him to get a knockout. Just annoying people by just being boring, and he'll probably get the Paddy Pimblett treatment after the fight as well. So Ian Garry, for me, he's just better than Michael Venom Page. Like, Michael Venom Page beat Kevin Holland, but I don't read too much into that because, in my opinion, Kevin Holland, is just low IQ, and he's just nowhere near as good as he should be, and he just throws away fights by being stupid, and it's irritating. Like, if you've ever put money on Kevin Holland, I would never advise you to do it, depending on who it is, because he can just make himself look silly and quit and not try, and then make small, stupid decisions. Like in that Wonderboy Thompson fight, agreeing to stay on the feet the whole fight. Like, this guy does not care, Kevin Holland. So I'm not reading into that Page fight too much. Yeah, it's a good win to have in your record, the name. But the way he fights, I don't rate it. But Ian Garry, for me, he is improving each fight, and he just gets the job done. Right, Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze. You are not going to like who I'm going to pick. Who am I going to pick to win the fight? Roman Dolidze, for me, is going to KO Anthony Smith. And I think he can do it in the first round. And the reason I'm not getting fooled by that Petrinho win. That Petrinho win happened again because of low IQ. That was so winnable for Petrinho because all he had to do pretty much was keep it on the feet standing, winning on the feet already. But what does the idiot do? Shoot in and goes to like get the over-unders and then look to go for the takedown. Like, what are you doing? Why are you taking down a guy with extremely good jiu-jitsu? And Roman Dolidze, he can match Anthony Smith's level of jiu-jitsu. But he's one fighter where even if he's got really good jiu-jitsu, he looks to strike a lot more than like shooting on takedowns every minute. And that's what I think he's going to do. Like, don't be fooled by that one loss to Imavov, whose striking is crisp, hurt him in the first round. He's got a very good chin. So I doubt that Anthony Smith will be able to KO him. Submission is possible, but I don't think he's going to outstrike him. And I'll say that because he throws a leg kick every now and then, but he throws it very slow, and everything Anthony Smith does. Say what you want about him being an underdog. Yeah, it's good him getting the wins. But this is one guy where he's not one of these dumb light heavyweights who all he has is striking and a little bit of grappling. He can grapple, has got good jiu-jitsu even from the bottom. Like a submission from Dolidze probably won't happen, but it's possible. Like, he's got a very good way of when he's on his back, getting a triangle and then getting an arm bar and transitioning into the triangle and then looking to take the heel. But he won't do that. He don't really do that as much. He strikes. And he should have beaten Marvin Vettori in London. He got robbed in that fight. He was marching him down. He was landing on the chin, like kind of rocking him, but not like to the point where he was about to get knocked down. But he was hurting Marvin Vettori and putting him on the back foot. And I think he can do that to Smith. Smith ain't eating them shots that Marvin Vettori took. I'm sorry, he just ain't. He's way too old. Well, not way too old. He's way too... It feels like he's old because he's been here forever, but he's way too like weak now. His durability ain't that good. He somehow survives in fights because people like Johnny Walker felt bad and allowed him to carry on. Ryan Spann hurt him badly, but decides, let me be an idiot and not jump on top of you and finish you. Just hug you pretty much. Like, the fighters he is beating, they are making low IQ decisions in good situations. So I'm expecting Dolidze to just march him down with the boxing. And if Dolidze tries to shoot, if Anthony Smith tries to shoot, again, I'll say it again, that bottom game of Dolidze is extremely good. You just don't see it because it's hard to put him on his back. And if you do, like Nasruddin Imavov, that was when he was rocked and hurt. Smith ain't going to rock him and then put him on his back. He'll only be able to get him down if he just shoots on him and then he's down. That's the only way, not a knockdown. So I'm expecting Dolidze to win by KO. Right. Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. I'm struggling with who to pick. Because in my brain, I'm thinking Lopes should win. But there's something that people are forgetting about. Forget about that Mozart Evloev win here. Think about the Joe Anderson Brito on the Contender. And I'll tell you why I'm going to go with it. I'm going with Brian Ortega. I've got to do it. And I think he can actually win via a decision over Diego Lopes. And one thing that I think people write off with Brian Ortega, it's the stereotype about, not stereotype, it's the, I don't know what word to use, the agenda of him being soy. Because he's kind of got like a soy build, kind of like blocky. He hasn't got really that much muscle on his frame. He's like skinny fat. And the way his like joints like just got cooked against Yair Rodriguez. Yeah, injuries happen, but it was like the way it happened after being put in that armbar. Are you telling me a guy like Diego Lopes can't find a submission that can make his joints, which you would call soy, make him tap out again? I'm not sure about that, and that's why I'm going with a decision, because I think Brian Ortega's striking, it's not bad. One thing we've struggled with is when he comes up against the elite featherweights, when you're coming up against guys like, forget about that, that was an injury. The Volkanovski high fight IQ in and out of range. And then you come up against a Max Holloway who's just going to wear you out, really good boxing, good head movement at times back then, not talking about as much now. He's got good head movement, but I'm saying he gets hit more than he used to. Whereas Diego Lopes is just wild in the first round. And I think if you come in grabbing onto the clinch like that, Brian Ortega's very good at getting his over-unders, pushing you up against the cage because he's quite strong, and then pulling you down to the ground. And I don't think it's like the fight of Movsar Evloev where he's a pure wrestler who he may find a submission because of how good his like wrestling is, but he isn't a jiu-jitsu specialist. You got two of them here, jiu-jitsu specialists. I don't know who's better. Brian Ortega's got more experience, but Diego Lopes's jiu-jitsu looks way more exciting. You see a range of the submission attempts. I don't know what it is, but every time he gets like a submission onto someone, it looks like close to finishing it. Whereas Brian Ortega, as soon as he gets it deep in, it's pretty much over. Like, that Volkanovski thing still shocks me how he was able to survive. And I think, remember what they say, you have two jiu-jitsu guys, they'll end up striking. Or next thing you know, they'll get into a grappling competition and not a jiu-jitsu fight. But I think it will be on the feet until Brian Ortega goes for the first shoot. Because I don't really think we've seen Diego Lopes actually shooting for takedowns. He looks to strike, and he's got this like very hard hammer fist that comes over the top as a strike. Strickland did it on that Twitter video against that guy he fought in Japan. The one thing I would fear is he better not be doing a lot of like spinning attempts. Like if you do that, spinning elbow like you dropped Chancellor Young with, he'll take us back and is in like severe dangers. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think on the feet it's going to look more competitive than you think. Like, name one guy who's actually just chinned him in the first round. None. Because it doesn't happen. Max Holloway, not too much power, but he can wear you down and finish you. Fair enough, it was a doctor's stoppage. And then you got Volkanovski here, you just... I'm sorry, apart from that guillotine choke, just bullied him on the feet until he grew into the fight a bit later on, but it wasn't for long and he didn't really do anything to win the fight. And then Yair Rodriguez, that's an injury. Like, he doesn't really get knocked out. Like, I don't think his chin is as bad as you think. It's actually quite good to the point where he should have been finished in those fights. Like, but he can find a way to survive in the fight and he's able to stay in. And I think against Diego Lopes has got to get a finish for me. If he doesn't get the finish, he isn't winning the fight. Whereas I think Ortega has got a way of winning by decision, but he could also win by submission. So the people saying a decision for Lopes, I think he's more likely to KO him because he isn't holding down Brian Ortega on the ground. He's more of a bottom game than a top game fighter, but he can do jiu-jitsu from both. Whereas Brian Ortega, he actually can wrestle, even if you want to call him soy. He did it to Yair Rodriguez, which you might argue doesn't have that good, like, takedown defense, but he was able to deal with him on the ground, like, pretty much manhandle him. And I think we can do it with Diego Lopes. Like, remember what happened with Brito. Like, he just held him down for 3 rounds, and I see something similar here. But he will threat submission attempts, but because of how good Brian Ortega's jiu-jitsu is, how high level it is, I think he will know how to defend against those heel hooks. He won't panic, he won't try and, like, force his leg out. He will roll with the submissions. The scrambles are good. Like, I think a lot of things go into his favour, but I think because of his physique, people hating him too much. Right, Alex Pereira versus Jiří Procházka and Jacob Procházka. That fight that he had with Alexander Rakic, oh my god. I don't think Yuri's a glass straw. He really isn't. Like, getting knocked out by Alex Pereira by the left hook, there's no shame in it. And people were even saying it was a, what's the word, not a fluke, it was a controversial decision where they should have allowed it to carry on a bit longer. And with Alex Pereira, I think the people writing off Jiří, I don't think Jiří's going to win this, but I'm not doubting it, because if he wants to, and if he is smart, he will do what no fighter tries to do with Alex Pereira, apart from what Ankalaev will do, is wrestle. Because we've seen him try it against people like Dominic Reyes, who, if John Jones is struggling to get takedowns on Reyes, but you got one on him, what makes you scared to shoot on Alex Pereira? Like, we don't see a lot of people shooting him and have good success. Like, Blachowicz took the back, but he did nothing with it. But if you can do that for like 5 rounds, which I doubt, you would win the fight via decision. So for me, a finish is inevitable, and I think Jiří Procházka could get a submission. But for me, I'm going with Alex Pereira. And I know it seems like such a casual bit, oh, you're going with him. The real people who are smart are going to go with Procházka by submission. I'm not writing that off. But I don't think the KO's coming late. We all know why he kept getting rocked against Adesanya. His chin cannot take punches off a middleweight. No, not off a middleweight. When you've cut down and you drain all the water out of you and you're drained, taking a punch is so hard. Compared to now, Jiří hit him with some hard shots and he was able to eat it. He was going backwards, but he can eat the shots. And with Jiří Procházka, one thing I fear about him is it's just the recklessness. Like, I can predict another KO happening, and I think it's going to happen in round 4. I think this is going to be a bit longer than that last one, because I think Jiří Procházka earlier on might win the rounds by going for takedowns and try to gas out Alex Pereira. But then I think as the fight goes on, Alex Pereira knows what he's going to do. He's going to get the read on Procházka, who's shooting on these takedowns, and then he's starting to stumble and now start pushing Procházka back, and now the leg kicks are starting to work. And when the leg kicks are starting to work, shooting on a takedown will be so much harder, because you can't put all of that weight onto the leg to shoot as like effectively. And because of that, as the fight grows on, like Alex Pereira, in my opinion, you might disagree, in the first fight of Adesanya in the UFC, I had it 2-2 going into that 5th round. And when they got into the 5th round, you saw what happened. Like, Alex Pereira has got very good cardio. It's very underrated. Like, he can go for days. Cardio ain't an issue. It's the grappling. And with Jiří Procházka, it's not the chin. It's the thinking, and it's the style of your hands down against a guy who hits like a truck. But then again, it makes it harder for Alex Pereira to read, so I can see why you're going with Procházka, because if your hands are down and you're level changing and you're like throwing off different angles, to get the read on Jiří Procházka, it was not easy earlier on. But one thing he can do if he doesn't shoot in is just chew up that leg and have a repeat of the first fight. Like, those elbows that worked, they probably worked because when he was kicking the legs, when he shot him for that takedown, he couldn't like explosively shoot in, wrap his hands around the legs and like dump him. He didn't do that. It took him a bit of a while to like get his hands around it. By the time he's done that, Alex Pereira's already hit him with about like 2 strikes. And to be fair, he only shot him for the takedown after getting dropped by the left hook. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about when he goes for the takedown. It happened after he got dropped, and I can just see it happen again, but a bit later on, because like I keep mentioning, I think he's going to go with a different route. If he goes in with the same route and goes in with that Rakic route, he'll get knocked out in the first round, because he was eating bombs off Rakic. I don't know how he survived that, if I'm honest with you. But if that's Alex Pereira, that left hook was there all day. And I think in this fight here, he's going to find the left hook again, but I think he'll find it in round 4. Because what will happen is, when he's getting tired, I can see Jiří getting put on the back foot, and then that's when Alex Pereira lands his left hook with Jiří Procházka's back off the cage and puts him again, but I think it'll be an out cold one this time. I don't think it'll be like a knockdown one. It will be like purely out cold. So yeah, that's it. Interesting fight, but I would have preferred Conor McGregor Chandler. I'm sorry, I really would. It's just entertaining, like the press conference, everything. But yeah, thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.